How do we build chords? And what does it mean to invert them? I got asked to make this video by a guy named Eric Simonson, who has self-labeled himself an amateur guitar player. He felt like my video yesterday on practicing chord inversion started in the middle. And it certainly didn't start at the very beginning. So that's what this video is going to do. It's sort of going to build us up from the very beginning. In music, and especially music theory, we use a lot of labels to talk about and remember things and to analyze them. And so the first thing we need to understand is the labeling system of chords and intervals. And let's start with intervals. An interval is the distance between any two notes. That's the simplest definition. The way we label an interval is with a number and a quality. So some examples are major second or minor second, major third or minor third, perfect fourth or augmented fourth, also known as the tritone, perfect fifth or diminished fifth, also a tritone. How do we come up with those labels? It doesn't make a ton of sense, but it does make a ton of sense, to put it bluntly. So you'll have to sort of live with this for a minute for it to really click. But basically, the letter defines the number. What do I mean by that? If I'm in the key of C major and I play a C to a D, I call it a major second, and I know that, but you can know that because the D natural is the D you would get in the C major scale. In a major scale, all the intervals are major or perfect. So any C to any D is a second, right? And we call that a major second. If that D becomes a D flat, we call that a minor second. But here's the kicker. If we call that D flat a C sharp, and it's C to C sharp, it's technically an augmented unison. So what I mean by that is it's no longer a second because it's a C to another C. But because they're 1/2 step apart, it's not a unison. And the way we basically make intervals bigger is to augment them. So it's an augmented unison. Another example, C natural to E natural. Again, both notes in the C major scale, but E is the third note in the scale, so we call it a third, right? That's a major third. It belongs in the major scale. If I make the E flat, it becomes a minor third. That's the third you would find that starts off in the minor scale. So like A to C, A, B, C, the first three notes of A minor. A to C is a minor third, okay? Basically, if you take any major interval and make it 1/2 step smaller, it becomes minor. If you take any perfect interval and make it 1/2 step smaller, it becomes diminished. If you make it a 1/2 step bigger, it becomes augmented. You don't often get the other intervals being called augmented, so I don't need to go over that. Okay, so now, where is this coming from? Well, in the major scale, I've got C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And I'm just going to number them 1 through 7. C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, and so on. That's why we call C to D a second. Right? It's the second scale degree in the major scale that belongs to C. This is why we call C to E a third, because it's the third note. C to F is a fourth. F is the fourth note in the C major scale. And so on and so forth. That's where we get the number for our intervals. The quality, the best way to remember and learn them is to relate it always to the major scale. If it's not the interval, or the third you would get in the major scale, it's probably minor. But not always. If it's bigger, then it's going to be an augmented third, which is a weird interval because it's really just a perfect fourth. So, relate everything to your major scale, but you got to know you're in major scale. I did a video on this a while back, so check out my TikTok and my YouTube and my Instagram and my Facebook for those videos. Smash the subscribe button. Give me a follow on any of the platforms that you prefer. I'm putting mostly the same content out on all the platforms, so just pick the one you want. But do know that as I start to learn more about which platform responds better to what kind of content, I'll be separating the content out to get better performance, just like everybody else has to do. So yeah, follow me everywhere. Smash the subscribe button. Eric Simonson, if this is helpful, I would love a follow and a subscribe. The major scale is one of the things every guitar player should learn, right? And you can talk about it in a very abstract way as a series of intervals. And we get a whole step, and then a half step. But then we get a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, and then another half step. That's a major scale. If we do it on the low E string, and I highly suggest this is where you start so you really visualize the pattern, it's going to be open, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 12. Sorry, I misspoke there. I got my tongue tied, I guess. Those are your notes in E major, and we could label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 or 1 again, right? In E major, I get F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and D sharp. There are 4 sharps. Map that out on that low string and then move that around. Start it on G. And then mess around with it. Moving across one string can be awkward, so feel free to make music out of it if that helps. Okay, so now we have the major scale mapped out, we understand what intervals are, etc., etc. So we can either just think of it as stacking thirds when we build a chord, or we can pick any note in our scale and just do every other note in the scale after that. So if I started with C, I would skip D and play E, I would skip F and play G, and I would get a C major scale. If I did it in E, I would play an E, I would skip the F sharp and play the G sharp, I would skip the A and play the B, and I would get an E major. That's how we build chords, right? It's stacking thirds, which is why it's called tertiary harmony. So a major third has 4 half steps, and a minor third has 3 half steps, right? However, they're only thirds if the letters tell you they're thirds. This stuff is sort of hard to wrap your head around. Watch this video a couple times and live with it for a while. And if you want any more info, please feel free to reach out. I do Zoom lessons and stuff if you'd love to really dig into this. I'd be happy to do that with you. So holler at me. Follow me on any of the platforms and send me a DM. Okay, so now we know how to build our major scale. We understand what intervals are. And we know now that we're going to stack thirds. Or we could think of it as skipping every other note in the scale to make our major chord. Well, not always major, but sometimes minor, sometimes diminished, sometimes augmented, etc., etc. And that's the gist of it, building chords. And if you keep that process going, you would get the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th above the root note. I think I'm slipping out of tune, but I'm not going to fix it right here in the video, so bear with me. If you keep going, after 7, you skip 8 and you get 9. This is why chords are called 9 chords. Sus 9, add 9. Right? We've already got the 10 because it's the same as the 3rd. The 4th, however, we end up calling an 11 a lot of times. This is why we get 9 chords, 11 chords, and 13 chords. Because we just keep skipping every other note. And if we did it with numbers, it would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. That's 7 notes. That has every note in the scale in it if you play just a straight 13 chord like that. And it's not going to sound amazing unless you voice it right. So anyway, what does it mean to invert the chord, right? What that means is, basically, it just tells us what the bass note is. So if the note that we use to label the chord, which we're going to call the root, is in the bass, that is root position. It's not an inversion. However, if we then take that note and we flip it up an octave, now we get a first inversion chord. And this only actually is a first inversion chord if the E is the lowest note. If I'm playing C, G, C, and I flip that first C up an octave, I just get a doubled C here. Now G is my lowest note. When the 5th of the chord is in the bass, we call that second inversion. When the 3rd of the chord is in the bass, we call that first inversion. When the 7th of the chord is in the bass, we call that 3rd inversion. After that, we really just use slashes. So like a G7 with a 9 in the bass would just be a G7/A, and it would probably sound not great. Sounds like that. But I guess you could call that 4th inversion, but I've never heard it said that way. So just call that a G7/A or G7/A. That's what it means to invert chords. That's how you build chords. That's how they relate to the scales. And that's how you figure out what your intervals are. So I highly suggest you watch this video whenever you need it. Not for my views. I wish I could let you download it. I'm not even sure how to do that. Maybe if there's a way, I'll make this video downloadable. I'm not pandering for views, but I am trying to say that you have to live with these concepts to really start to grasp them. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to them. They just are the way they are. And the rhyme and reason comes sort of as you understand them better. Okay? Hope that helped, Eric. If this video helped you, smash my subscribe button. Find me on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at The Unreal Mark Albion on TikTok, at Mark Albion on Facebook, and at mark.albion on Instagram. I love y'all. Happy practicing. I hope this was helpful. Have a good day.